What's good, everyone? Welcome to another edition of Power Core Productions and Podcastings. I'm your host, Jerron Harrington, back to hit you with another video. And today, we're going to be continuing What If Deku Was the Son of Rock Lee? My Hero Academia Fighting Spirit, Part 7. As always, if you enjoyed today's video and everything else that we have on the channel, then please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is Power Core Productions and Podcastings that has to come out now and in the future. Where we last left off with this series, Izuku, along with Bakugo and Todoroki, took on All Might during the final semester exam, and with the combined effort of their teamwork, they were able to win. In this timeline, Todoroki has been given One for All by All Might, while Izuku has decided that he will become stronger in his own way, training like his father did, Rock Lee, who, even with his own power, was able to rival the symbol of peace in his prime, who also had the quirk. Bakugo, eventually finding out as well, has also made it his goal to surpass the both of them, the two descendants of two of the greatest heroes that this world has ever known. But now, how will their adventure fare as they go through with the training camp? As the League of Villains are about to make their move, how will this affect the timeline? Who will make it? Who will be captured? And what will this lead to going into the showdown against All for One? Now, as we continue the story, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. With summer break being just 3 weeks before the UA summer camp training would take place, Izuku spent his time with his family, with his father Lee and his mother Inko. Both Lee and Inko were aware of All Might's secret and the power of One for All, and they had also become aware that Todoroki had taken the power. But they were also surprised that Izuku knew as well, along with his friend Bakugo. With all these changes and everything else happening around them, Lee and Inko felt that it was time to talk to their son. They had a family vacation. They went to the beach, going to a nice hotel where they spent family time with one another. One night, as Izuku and Lee were on the beach, watching the stars in the sky, Lee looked to his son, and he decided that now was time to tell him about everything that had been going on. Lee explained that after his fight with All for One 5 years ago, it affected his body in a way that could never truly recover. Lee would then ask Izuku if he remembered what was going on at that time. Young Izuku didn't remember very much. He just remembered that his parents left for a mission one day, and he stayed with Bakugo and his family, and he didn't see his father and mother for a few weeks. That was the time where Lee was recovering in the hospital along with All Might, following their battle with All for One. Lee would then reveal the scar that he had been given from All for One, and how he almost destroyed himself in the process. He got it while using 7 of the 8 inner gates, and as such, he's never truly been what he once was, not fully at 100%. He also told Izuku that the possibility would come where he might have to retire someday. It seemed as though as time went on, the more he used the power, the worse it got for him. This shocked Izuku. He saw the strength that his father possessed, And to think that his father might have to give up being a hero or even worse, that was more than what Izuku thought that he could handle. But Lee would place his hand on Izuku's shoulder. As they looked up into the starry sky together, he told his son about the will of fire and what it meant and what it stood for in the world that he came from, and how he wanted that will of fire to be passed on to Izuku. He told him that above all else, the power he had been given was a power meant to protect, a power that was meant to do good in this world, and that as long as Izuku remembered that he would carry on that will wherever he went. He told Izuku that above all else he was proud of him as a father. He had seen the growth and just how far he had come, and he couldn't have asked for a better son. And with that, he would give him a hug. He would tell him that no matter what the future held for them, even if he should lay down his life, he would do so gladly for the ones that he loved and cared for. Inko would then join them in that moment as the family embraced. They weren't sure of what was going to happen in the future, with the rise of the League of Villains, and all the other dangers that came along with that. But they knew as long as they stuck together as a family, there was nothing that they couldn't overcome. Eventually, their break would come to an end, and Class 1A, along with 1B, would gather together as they began their trip towards where the training camp was going to be. Izuku was on the bus, but he looked out the window, not really thinking much of anything, where he would get a kick from the back of his seat as it was Bakugo trying to get his attention, asking him if he had improved in his training or done anything recently, but Izuku hadn't. He was dabbling with the idea of going into the 4th gate next, but that was training that he decided to hold off on until the camp came. And he also wanted to look into his chakra nature. Of course, his father couldn't use ninjutsu or genjutsu, so he wouldn't have any way to learn it himself. But at the very least, he knew he had lightning release chakra. If he could somehow incorporate it into his fighting style, then that would be a major boost in power. Todoroki overheard them from the front, and he told them that he was making his own strides as well, at least as best as he could using One for All. All Might and he had talked much, and they were deciding when they should tell his father. However, Todoroki decided against it, knowing fully well that his father wouldn't take too kind to him having All Might's power. Although, that was just the type of thing that would make him pissed, and maybe he would take his time in telling him to enjoy it. Anyway, before long, the two buses would stop over at a cliffside to take a break. As they looked around, they would see a forest that stretched out for miles around them, when the black car would pull up, and two female cat-like heroes would pop out, a young boy with a red hat. The two heroes were a part of a hero team known as the Wild Wild Pussycats, one of them being a blonde-haired girl named Pixie Bop, and the other one being a short-haired brunette named Mandalay. They would welcome them, telling them that this entire area was actually owned by them, and this was going to be where their training camp was going to be held, and that they were going to be using this time for them to get stronger and improve. As some of the students began to notice and realize that they had stopped somewhere earlier, it didn't take long for them to understand the true meaning of why they had chosen this area. Izuku could sense it as the mountain began to shift and change, seemingly as though it were a rock slide and everyone started to fall down to the ground below. Everyone except Izuku, who was smart enough to flip and move out of the way in time. Using his chakra, he was able to stick to the road before being knocked off, Pixie Bop being surprised that he was actually able to sense her attack. Mr. Aizawa looked at him, not too shocked seeing as how Izuku was always one of the most skillful of the class, but he would tell him to go down there and rejoin the others, since they all had to work together to get to the training camp and get through the forest. Izuku nodded and he joined the others down below, who were a bit agitated that he saw it coming before they did. However, they would quickly have to put their bickering aside, as before they knew it, they would be set upon by rock-like monsters. This was another one of Pixie Bob's quirks, and they knew that they were going to be in for a long haul. Izuku, Bakugo, Todoroki, and Ida would all take the lead, with the class following quickly behind them. Izuku, Todoroki, and Bakugo specifically deciding to take their powers to the limits just to see what they could do. At first glance, Izuku getting a chance to see Bakugo and Todoroki's abilities, he could tell that they were definitely making major strides in their training. Especially Todoroki, who seemed to have gotten a hang over the percentage of one for all that he could use from the beginning, as they eventually made their way through. It would take them about an hour and 30 minutes, surprising even some of the teachers, considering that they thought they would have at least taken 2.5 at the most, but he chalked it up to his 3 brightest students in particular, that being Izuku, Bakugo, and Todoroki. And Pixie Bob took a liking to them as well, Mandalay trying to rein in her hero mate, explaining that she was going through that time where she was looking for love also. As everyone made their way through, Izuku would notice a young boy standing off to the side and would go to introduce himself. As he did so, the boy would instead try to go for a punch towards Izuku's family jewels. However, Izuku's reflexes were good enough where he was able to vanish, seemingly out of thin air before reappearing behind Kota, and he would chastise him for trying to hit him with such a low blow like that. Kota would try to go in for one more hit, but Izuku would again vanish from sight before appearing behind him, telling him that that was just a waste of time. Kota would instead kick him in the shins though, and that was something Izuku didn't see coming, and Bakugo wouldn't help but smirk and laugh at him as Kota walked away angrily. Mandalay would try to apologize for her cousin's behavior, as she knew that this was a rather touchy subject for him, and Izuku would tell her that it was fine and nothing to worry about. The rest of that evening would be spent with the class getting a chance to eat and recover. Of course, after today they were going to have to cook their own meals, and the training was going to be excruciating. But for now they made the most of it, and decided that they would try to rest and get some recovery, because the rest of the training camp was going to be anything but easy. When the time came for the training camp to start, Mr. Aizawa would explain to them that despite everything they had been through, there were still many areas where they could improve in when it came to their quirks and other abilities. He told them that the purpose of this training camp was to see just how far they could go, to truly go beyond and to go plus ultra. Among the class, Todoroki, Bakugo, and Izuku would stand amongst themselves, as they all talked about what they were going to try to improve and train in. For Todoroki, he had already gotten a good mastery over 15%, so he wanted to up the voltage, so to speak. He wanted to see if he could go another 5 or 10% to get to an overall mastery of 20 to 25, believing that he was already making good enough progress as it was. Bakugo, in the meantime, wanted to increase the output of his explosions. He needed to make them a lot more stronger than they already were, so he was going to be working on that. As for Izuku, he still wanted to see if he could tap into the 4th gate, but before anything else, he wanted to dabble into using his lightning release chakra. And so, the 3 would all go their separate ways to work on their different expertise and in their different areas of training. For Todoroki, he would sit in a tub of hot water, almost to the point of boiling, and he would have to regulate his body and temperature over and over again, creating a large wall of ice and then dissolving it with his heat. He would do so repeatedly over and over again to reach his limits before breaking it once more. As for Bakugo, he would stand on the side of a cliff and he would slam his fist into the side to create an explosion. Although he made sure that the cliffside was always facing towards the sun, so he could produce a high amount of sweat. He also had bottles of water as well as Gatorade to produce electrolytes to help keep him refueled at all times, increasing the amount of sweat he would make through his glands, as the nitroglycerin that he excreted from his body will allow him to produce the explosions in the first place. And as for Izuku, he decided to go somewhere where he could use his power without harming anyone. Mr. Aizawa would check on him and ask what he was up to, and Izuku would have to try to explain how chakra worked. Of course, Mr. Aizawa didn't understand it fully, but he understood enough to tell what Izuku was up to. He would tell him that alongside with his monstrous strength, he had a nature release, if you will. It was lightning based, but tapping into it was something that could be a little difficult for him. That was when Mr. Aizawa would come up with the idea of having him work with Dinky Kaminari. Since he had an electric type quirk also, he figured that working with him would allow Izuku to draw it out himself. And Izuku took him up on his advice. Working with Dinky, Dinky would learn from Izuku, and Izuku would learn from him as well. From Izuku, Dinky would learn a lot more self-control, to learn how to output his electrical charges at various points throughout his body, instead of just launching it out all at once, since that would give him very little control and it often left him short-circuited afterwards. And from Dinky, Izuku was able to get a sense and a feel for electricity, allowing him to feel the electrons moving throughout his entire body, down to his fingertips. As he did so, he would feel the sparks of green lightning coming from him as he drew it out of himself over and over again, until eventually he was able to shroud his body in crackles of green electricity. This was his lightning release. He could feel it forming through him. With every kick and every punch, there was a discharge of electrical energy that came from it. For Izuku, this was like a new technique, but what was he going to call it? He eventually settled on the name, Lightning Style, Overdrive, thinking that this was a nice evolution of the Lightning Style cloak, and that was what he would work towards in the meantime. The students would continue to train and improve in their abilities during the training camp. Izuku, Bakugo, and Todoroki very pleased to see where their training was taking them so far. Whenever they could, they would try to go for a little bit of sparring against one another, and they would give pointers and tips where the other was improving and where the other was lacking. For Bakugo, he seemed to be improving in the strength of his explosions, but he needed to concentrate more on where he set them off, getting more precise with his attacks. For Todoroki, he was getting increase in his overall usage of One for All, but they would advise that he should be careful and not overdo it, as he might accidentally blow himself up or overfreeze himself to death. And as for Izuku, his lightning release was something unique and special, but it really wasn't matching to his overall physical strength. He had to figure out a way to combine the two perfectly and avoid any of the lag, or so to speak, because every few times when he would punch or kick, there wasn't lightning release behind it. It was something that would flicker on and off. Izuku had to get a mastery over turning it on and turning it off at will, and learning of when he wanted to distribute his electrical charges. Mr. Aizawa was very pleased to see how his students were coming along, especially to see just how far Izuku, Bakugo, and Todoroki had come as well. They were definitely standing out among everyone else, and they were all unlikely going to be the next big three for their class. Also in the meantime, Izuku would come to learn more about Kota and his situation. He would learn about how he had lost his parents tragically, and how they had been murdered by a villain. And that was the reason why Kota didn't really care for heroes very much, since being a hero is what got his parents killed in the first place. This left Izuku in a weird position. He had always looked up to heroes, but then the more he thought about it, he had to look at it from another point of view. In Kota's mind, the role and the idea of being a hero is what got his parents killed in the first place. And in the end, if he had gone down a similar path, there's no telling how he would have felt. What if All For One had killed his father 5 years ago? Or his mother? There was no telling how he would handle such an event. Would he still want to be a hero? Or would he become disillusioned with them? He spoke with Bakugo and Todoroki about this, Bakugo telling him to simply mind his own business, but Todoroki told him that there are certain situations that can't simply be changed with words, and that sometimes you have to let someone come to their own conclusion by themselves. Izuku appreciated the advice, and that night they were going to be doing something special, a test of courage, if you will, for the students that would go through the forest. That is, for most of them, as a few others had to stay back for remedial classes with Mr. Aizawa. In the meantime, though, Izuku would notice that Kota didn't get a chance to eat, and he wondered if he should go and give him some food. Just as he was pondering this, there would be an explosion throughout the forest. No one knew what was happening at first, and they thought someone had started a fire accidentally. But as they saw the blue flames creeping up all around the camp, and a strange gas starting to form around them, it didn't take them long to realize that they were under attack, and they were under attack by the League of Villains. Mandalay became worried for Kota's safety, but Izuku told her that he was going to go and find them, since he had followed the young man a couple of times, and he knew where Kota liked to stay in private. So he would go and find and make sure that he was alright, while the others would look to make sure that everyone else was safe from the villains, and get word back to Mr. Aizawa and Vlad back at the training camp facility. As Izuku made his way towards the cliffside, where he would eventually find Kota, he would see that he wasn't alone. There was someone else with him. A man, rather tall and built, with muscle. He had one eye that seemed to have been scarred, and as Izuku got a closer look, he realized that that was the villain, the one who had killed Kota's parents all that time ago. Kota recognized the man also, and he became very afraid. Muscular, taunting that he was going to end the boy once and for all. However, before he could, Izuku would get in between them, delivering a leaf hurricane and kicking him back. As Muscular got a closer look at Izuku, he realized that he was one of the targets that they were after also, and figured that he was going to enjoy this. He had seen what he could do at the sports festival, and he wanted a good fight. After all, he was the son of Hirodora, and he wanted to see what all that strength was about. And Izuku was more than willing to oblige, as he got into his fighting stance and prepared for the fight that was to come, while the other students down below had to deal with the League of Villains, who were also on the look for a few other students as well. That was Tokoyami, Bakugo, and Todoroki. Shigaraki had his sights set on these four in particular, believing that they could be of great use to him. If he could get them on his side, then that could be all the better. But for the son of Hirodora, he didn't think he was going to get him to flip, but that was alright. His father had caused his master great harm in the past, and he would have no problem returning the favor in kind to Hirodora, giving him back his son's lifeless corpse, or at least whatever would be left of him after he was completely decayed, that was. Izuku would open the first and the second gate before jumping in with a dancing leaf hurricane, spinning straight towards Muscular, kicking him in the chest and sending him back a few feet. Muscular's body would then be overgrown with the muscle fibers that formed around him. He could feel the attack potency of Izuku, and he could tell that he definitely had some power within him. As the two went and collided with one another, Muscular delivering his devastating punches, enhanced by his monster strength, and Izuku matching as well, as he continued more of the output of the 8 inner gates. It seemed as though the mountainside itself was beginning to rock and shake with each punch and kick that was thrown between the two. Kota was in absolute awe of what he was seeing, to see that Izuku wasn't just holding his own, but he was actually able to fight back and push against the villain, the one that had caused him so much harm in the past before. All the same though, Izuku could tell that he was going to be on the losing end. He had gone up into the 3rd gate, but that wasn't enough. Not against Muscular. He seemed to be overwhelming in strength, and he could feel the power fading from him quickly, as he started to be beat back down into the ground over and over by Muscular, who eventually picked him up and threw him into the side of the mountain, causing a crater as Izuku got lodged in. Muscular was about to go in for the knockout blow, when he found himself being hit by water. He then realized that it was the young man, and that power that he had, it was very similar to those heroes that he killed. Was this twerp those heroes' kids? Oh wow, talk about a twist of fate. It looked like he was going to rejoin that little sucker with his family up in heaven, because he was about to die. However, Izuku wasn't going to let that happen. As Muscular walked closer towards him, a faint, ominous glow would appear behind him, Izuku's eyes turning hollow white, as his skin started to turn bright red and his hair began to flare up. Crackles of green lightning starting to form all around him as he looked towards Muscular in anger and disgust. Izuku felt himself tapping into the 4th gate and feeling it unleash its large torrent of chakra as a swirl of energy appeared around him. He would then dash in between Kota and Muscular before kicking him in the face, and then delivering another flurry of hidden lotuses, kicking him in the gut and sending him into the air over and over again. Izuku would use the cliffside as well as a few other tall trees and other rocks to bounce from them over and over again as he went punching at Muscular repeatedly. He attempted to use his ever-growing muscle fibers to shield him. However, Izuku would use his lightning release to burn away at the fibers, burning them to ash and reducing his strength and durability, until eventually he had beaten him down into a bloodied and black and blue state. But he wasn't finished yet. Izuku would grab him by the throat and throw him straight into the air, before appearing behind him with the dancing leaf shadow. Izuku would press his fingers towards his back as he would grab him and hold him into a full Nelson chokehold. Izuku wouldn't let go of the hold no matter what Muscular did, as they went spiraling straight towards the side of the mountain. Izuku would use lightning style, primary lotus, 4th gate, as they went rocketing towards the side itself. It would sound as if a missile had just been dropped on the whole forest, and everyone for miles could hear the sound vibrating across the sky. They would look over and see a large pile of smoke coming from the top of the mountain, but they had no idea what was going on. From out of the smoke itself, Muscular lay, beaten and unconscious, as Izuku walked away from the side. Thankfully, the technique had been enough, but it had been taxing on his body. He felt as though he could barely stand and move, but he knew that now wasn't the time to falter. Now, he had to keep going. As Kota would sit on his shoulders, thanking him for what he had done, Izuku assured him that everything was going to be alright, because he was here. Meanwhile, back in the forest, the League of Villains would be making their way through the students. The villain known as Mustard Gas had delivered the poisonous toxin, and it was only thanks to Momo creating the gas mask that was able to keep the students safe. However, Jiro had gotten the worst of it. They had attempted to escape and get everyone to safety while dealing with the villains as best they could. Uraraka and Froppy coming into contact with Toga, as well as Todoroki coming into conflict with the one known as Dabi. However, Todoroki soon realized that he was the one they were after, both he and Bakugo attempting to escape as best they could, as the villains would chase after them. Izuku had become aware of this when Muscular had told him that he was one of the 4 that he was after. As Kota eventually got the Mandalay, after dropping off Kota and making sure that everything was alright, Mandalay would use her quirk to relay the message to everyone that they were allowed to use their quirks to fight back, and once they did so, the students would take a stand for themselves. Izuku would continue to race through the forest area to try to find and catch up to where everyone else was. He would eventually find where Bakugo and Todoroki were, and they weren't too far from where Tokoyami was either. In the darkness of night, Dark Shadow had grown out of control, almost too much for them to handle. However, Todoroki was able to create a large flame of light, channeling in the powers of One for All, although he could feel that he too were reaching his limit now, being attacked over and over again. The League of Villains now felt as though they came what they were looking for, as they had all 4 of their targets gathered together in one spot. Mr. Compress, attempting to use his quirk, would try to capture them all. However, he would only be able to take 3 in particular, that being Bakugo, Tokoyami, and Todoroki. Upon seeing this, and now hearing that more backup was on the way, everyone would be told to pull out immediately, and all the villains, with the help from Kurogiri, would attempt to make their escape. However, Izuku, now catching his second wind, would open the gates once more, jumping high into the sky as he went attacking at the other villains, before eventually getting to Mr. Compress. Getting behind him, he would kick him in the side, causing him to drop a few of the marbles that he had created. Izuku went reaching for them, and he managed to grab 2, while Mr. Compress would take back the 1, before eventually they would all disappear. However, the compression quirk would become undone, and they would see who they had managed to save. Izuku had managed to pull back Tokoyami and Bakugo back to safety. However, Todoroki could see that he was the one being taken by the villains. As he looked back through the gate, as Izuku and Bakugo both tried to jump back out to reach towards him, Todoroki told them that everything was fine, and that they just needed to get everyone else back to safety. However, the 2 of them would look back towards Todoroki, and they would yell that they were going to come for him, and that he just needed to hold on. Todoroki nodded as he disappeared into the dark void. Both Izuku and Bakugo would collapse back onto the ground, as the other students went to check on them and make sure that they were alright. However, the 2 of them, they were absolutely distraught. They were angered, more at themselves than anything else. They just let their classmate get taken by the League of Villains, and there was no telling what was to come. The teachers, along with the other authorities and the medical staff, would be called in immediately, as everyone would be taken to safety as the training camp came to an end. And now, it felt as though the stage had finally been set. The League of Villains was now becoming more and more emboldened, and they had made their strike and their intentions very clear. All the while, both Izuku and Bakugo would be stewing. They knew what they needed to do. They had to get Todoroki back. But how were they going to do so? And it wasn't just the students who were upset. When Endeavor learned what had happened to his son, everything for him began to change. All Might, Lee, and all the other heroes were now being called together. It seemed as though All for One was preparing to step back into the light. And now, it was going to take the combined effort of all of their heroes to defeat him. This concludes What If Deku Was the Son of Rock Lee? My Hero Academia Fighting Spirit, Part 7. As always, if you enjoyed today's video, then please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is Power Core Productions and Podcastings that is to come out now and in the future. Stay tuned for tomorrow's video as we are going to be concluding the series Darling in the Franxx Lionhearted, Darling in the Franxx crossover Voltron Legendary Defender, Part 7. But anyway, that's going to do it for the end of today's video. I'm Javon Harrington with Power Core Productions and Podcastings, signing off, and I'll see you next time.